Thanks for coming out, and thanks for your attention to this important issue. The reason we're out here today is to call attention to one of our Republican opponents, Mr. Oberweis's anti-immigrant advertising campaign that uses hateful immigrant bashing language to further divide and create fear within our communities. I'm speaking specifically about the $60,000 in cable advertising, television ads, and these pieces that were mailed to citizens and voters throughout Illinois' 14th district. Now, the idea behind this advertising campaign is to make people afraid of immigrants, so afraid that they're willing to cede their civil liberties and their right to privacy in exchange for a national ID card, a big brother solution like this biometric card depicted in his literature. Now, Oberweis is not alone. My Democratic opponent, Mr. Foster, has an even more extreme position and calls for all workers in America to get one of these cards. But if you look at the photo in Mr. Oberweis's advertisement, you can see that he's trying to avoid the touchy subject of undocumented Hispanic workers by using a Caucasian Swedish guy. More evidence that we are dealing with a crafty politician who does not quite grasp the problem and the nature of the problem. Biometric ID cards, I want to touch on these for a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about my position and how we handle the influx of immigration in this country. But biometric ID cards are not only expensive, but they would not force employees to actually hire workers who have the proper paperwork. The plan that Mr. Oberweis is suggesting is that some people who have visas would have to get the biometric ID cards, but the rest of the working population would not. Mr. Foster on the Democratic side says that every worker needs to have one of these biometric ID cards. Now, I understand people who overstay their visas contribute to the undocumented segment of our society. However, what is to prevent those who overstayed their visas from simply throwing their biometric ID card out, hiding and tearing up their documentation, and continuing to hide in the shadows? The other problem that this creates is for employers, because biometric ID cards cannot stop fake IDs, at least under Mr. Oberweis's plan. And at what point would the employer who sees somebody coming in to ask for a job determine and know to ask for that biometric ID card? Because if a white guy like Mikhail here in Mr. Oberweis's literature comes in, it's unlikely that the employer would ask. But it is more likely that if a brown person came in, he would be more likely to ask. And this creates worker discrimination. So this is just one more of the problems that a biometric ID card as proposed by Mr. Oberweis would create. And although my Democratic opponent is not starting to advertise on television, and his position is even more extreme than Mr. Oberweis's, we can hope that Mr. Foster will not take to the same path of advertising and creating fear and division in our society. Now, I don't want to get into the technological evidence that suggests that retinal scans and fingerprinting is not an accurate system, and I'm not going to talk about the added expense that this would have on business owners who would all have to have an electric scan card within their business place, and the questions of who's going to pay for this complicated system, who's going to pay for this national database of workers. All those questions from both of my opponents, who are both claim to be fiscal conservatives. But let me get to the heart of our message, which is that these ads are designed to make people afraid by blaming immigrants and keep people distracted from the real issues, like stagnating wages, unfair trade agreements, out-of-control health care costs, and of course the war in Iraq. In fact, if you looked at these advertisements, Mr. Oberweis only talks about immigration. He does not talk about the war in Iraq. He doesn't talk about health care. He doesn't talk about the struggling economy. He focuses only on immigrant bashing advertising that seeks to divide our society. Now, of course, it's not fair for me to stand up here and criticize my opponent without proposing solutions. And I think the solutions start by first rejecting the idea that any human being is illegal. at the end of the day, we may have different skin colors, different languages, and different cultures, but we all belong to one race, the human race. And let us set aside our differences in the divisive politics and seek unity. Unity of purpose, unity in the workplace. Let us instead focus on those things that we have in common instead of focusing on our differences. As a carpenter, I'm only concerned that the person working next to me can perform his or her job and that they're doing so safely. I do not care if that person is black, brown, white, male, or female. And as a veteran, I understand what it's like to serve, to be away from friends and family during the holidays, as so many of our young soldiers are doing during this holiday season. These soldiers come from all walks of life, from this country, and you'll find that they all have different skin colors. Yes, some are Hispanics, and this community should mourn the fact that we have now lost 3 Hispanic soldiers, and most recently, Specialist Ashley Sistema from DeKalb, a 20-year-old Hispanic woman, has joined this list. And at the end of the day, as we seek unity within our society, we need to address the root cause of immigration, which is worker exploitation. Exploitation here in America and exploitation in Mexico. Thanks to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, employers in Mexico are able to take advantage of hard times in Mexico. And indeed, there are hard times in other parts of the world, and we recognize that. People are coming to the United States because the Mexican economy is poor and broken. According to the World Bank, 50% of Mexico is living in poverty, 20% in deep poverty. And we recognize that the United States cannot afford to absorb all of the world's economic problems. That's not our responsibility. However, at the core of the immigration debate should be a discussion on getting out of NAFTA and going back to fair trade agreements, banning sweatshop trade, honoring workers' rights here in America, as well as workers' rights in Mexico, China, the Saipan Islands, and embracing these rights for all workers and seeking unity in the working class. Finally, there needs to be a practical, efficient legal path towards citizenship for those who wish to seek it. Now, the World Relief Immigration Services, right behind me, is where many immigrants start the legal process to become tax-paying citizens of the United States of America. Now, this is in no way amnesty. By definition, amnesty is being given something for free. Instead, we are talking about an earned path towards citizenship that requires the applicant to learn English and pass a citizenship test. These are the same steps towards citizenship that my grandparents and others took when they came to the United States via Ellis Island. And many of those immigrants didn't even have to pass a test. There was no bar, no legal route. They just came, signed their name in the book, and became United States citizens. And throughout my campaign, I have consistently put forward practical solutions that seek to build unity between workers in Mexico and China, because I understand that when a sweatshop owner in the Northern Mariana Islands or China or Mexico is abusing workers' rights, that it drags down wages here in the United States, causes jobs to leave the country, and instead of creating a market for cheap labor as NAFTA does, we need to create a market for goods that are made in America. And recognize that we have something in common with our brothers and sisters abroad. And in closing, I just want to be clear about why we're here and why I oppose the Republican Party's politics of fear. Because it was a fear-based message that got us into Iraq. Weak lawmakers like Dennis Hastert were afraid to ask questions because they were afraid to be called unpatriotic. There are a few people that stood up and who are patriotic, who asked tough questions about the war in Iraq. And this is common practice. Most dictators use fear and hate speech to silence patriotic voices who question authority and question things like a national ID card. And we cannot let fear of the unknown, a different culture, and misunderstanding of the facts take America down a dangerous road that causes us to seek a worker national ID card. And I oppose Mr. Oberweis's plan and Mr. Foster's plan, and I hope that they choose to turn towards the issues, reject the fear-based messaging of a national ID card. And just in closing, I want to say Benjamin Franklin said that any society that would give up a little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both.